And when you do ear training with reverb, it's good to use percussive sounds because of the way that they excite the reverb, and it's good to use sort of full frequency sounds like drums and things because they excite the room and you can really hear the reverb. It's hard to hear it with like long pads or something. You want to hear a little bit of percussiveness. Sometimes they use a snare, but I'll use congas this time. Yeah, once you pay, the updates are free. And, you know, uh, you start to train your ears to hear the the dimensions and the materials of these different rooms and the reverbs. Because think about it, just like we said on Tuesday, about being like a blind person who's locating themselves with, where are they? So does it have a high ceiling? Does it have a low ceiling? Does it have wood? Is it wood? Is it stone? Start to hear a little bit into that. So within each one of the impulse responses, they give you different distances that the microphones were pulled back from the sound source. And so you get three different depths that you can choose from within each impulse response. There were three different recordings. Sometimes they'll use different mics, omni mics or cardioid mics. Cardioid mics are a little brighter. Omni mics are a little more natural sounding for room mics for organic reverb. And yeah, this would be set on the return track or aux track, right? We don't want to put this on the individual track because, as we said before, it limits what we can do in terms of additional processing, which we'll do. So again, we talked, the theory, the philosophy on Tuesday about creating a front, a middle, and a back. And here we have that exact thing in the impulse responses, different distances of the miking. Now here is a garden hall somewhere in Europe. I don't know exactly where it is, but it's beautiful and it looks very regal. And it's a pretty big room, and you hear the hard surfaces. The harder the surface, the more high end that you hear in the reverb, right? And if there's curtains or wood, it tends to what we call dampen the sound, which means that it darkens the sound. Now, the next thing I want people to start to train their ears on a little bit mentally is early and late reflections. Has anyone heard about that? Early reflection and a late reflection? Basically, a lot of reverbs, you'll see them when it comes down to the editing, that they're separated. And there's two different sections. Valhalla Room is like that. There'll be the early reflections, which is the initial energy that comes right back to the listener. But there's also this slow buildup of energy. And those are called the late reflections. And they're usually bassy, and they're the slow moving fog. The fast moving energy is the early reflections, and the slow buildup, the slow residual buildup, is the late reflections. So see if you can start to use your ear to hear those as almost two different things. So we kind of went from sort of medium and large music halls. And we'll see as we start to set up our reverbs that like room reverbs are not that sexy. They're boxy, like we said before. And but rooms with high ceilings then become usually chambers, and those have very interesting acoustics and a richer reverb tail. So now we're going to go from sort of like music halls and bigger rooms to big cathedrals, right? Houses of worship. And you can hear that word wood church, right? The wood church is very different than the stone churches. It's warmer and it's darker and it's woodier. And that's a very easy one right there to hear the late reflections. Can everybody hear very clearly in Notre Dame the late reflections? That slow, low fog that just kind of gets all constant. Those are your late reflections. And mixers like to have separate control from the early and late reflections sometimes. And, you know, going through these larger houses of worship, think about the expertise that went into constructing these places before there was amplification, you know, and people would come to pray and sing, and how they built these beautiful natural amplifiers with their own frequency curve and response to make it be really beautiful when people were praying or singing. I mean, it's cool. It's hard for us to, you know, get on a plane and go to all these places, but to be able to tour this in Altiverb it puts the concept right in front of you. It's kind of amazing, right? And I always appreciate when I hear these churches. It is. When I hear these churches just, you know, and mosques and worship halls, how thoughtful the construction was to make it be like a mystical experience when people came to church or wherever they were going. Okay, so now we're going to go from church to the recording studio. And I think the first time when I play people these recording studio impulse responses, people are kind of underwhelmed and a little bit surprised as to how unsexy recording studios, even the top ones in the world, how they sound. Because in these recording studios, typically we're going for a neutral, tighter, shorter sound, so that you can add more later and you're not fighting the reverb of your recording. But here are some of the most famous recording studios all over the world, and you'll see they're kind of, plain. So you see what I'm saying? They're cool, they're tight. Not typically, Shane. No, you could, if you're the director of the movie, instead of the cinematographer, you're the reverbographer. I don't know, whatever it is. If you said, I want it to sound like Adele is in my living room with me, not on a stage, not in a small club, but she came over for chicken wings and cheesecake and she's singing with me. You could use one of these rooms and it would really sound like she was right there. Might be too much for some people. I don't know. You can use these rooms, you're painting a picture that you're right in a regular living room with someone, sort of. Better sounding than a living room for sure. So this is the Gol Gumbas Whispering Gallery in India, and it has this big circular construction which creates quite an interesting reverb. Again, created for a mystical effect for sure. And this is really the Great Pyramid from Egypt. They really went to the pyramids. I know. These people, they're crazy. And if you get Altiverb, you can wake up every morning and quietly go to your studio and put on your headphones and drink coffee and just talk to yourself in the Great Pyramid for a while. Just plug a mic in and put some reverb on it, and you can say affirmations in the Egyptian pyramids. I've done it for many years. It works. Trust me. But yeah, these guys are lunatics. They went to Egypt and they sampled the pyramids. And it's interesting. They don't sound as big as I would think they would sound. But it's a cool reverb. Like, you could imagine using it, especially on percussion. The triangular shape or something with the hard surfaces, it's got a cool sound. Okay, so some very serious, long, late reflections on the mausoleum in Norway. So now here's where it gets kind of I mean, it's always interesting, but here's where it gets sort of amazing. So now not only can we sample real rooms and real spaces, but we can sample gear. We can run a signal through the gear, and we can subtract that signal and be left with the ambience of the gear, right? So so that's what we've done. So now we go to analog reverb. And here is a spring reverb sampling of a vintage spring reverb. Excuse me. Spring reverbs are fake reverbs. It was the early attempt at reverb. But spring reverbs sound so cool, right? Spring reverbs are like incredible. They sounded like a metallic ringing of a spring. And if anybody is a fan of like old reggae dub, it's all about the spring reverbs on snares. So, and guitars and vocals. So spring reverb is a world of its own. Here's a spring reverb, and you'll hear the springs. It sounds like metal springs. So everyone could hear the metallic springiness of the spring reverb, yes? Lots of personality in the spring reverb. So now, here is these plates, EMT plates, the plates that take 4 big people to pick up. So now we've sampled those as well. Okay, so now as almost more of a brain twister, here is digital algorithmic reverb that has been sampled by convolution technology. I'll say that again. Digital algorithmic reverb that's been sampled by convolution technology. And here is a very famous Lexicon 480. These things, I think, used to cost $10,000. They were in every single recording studio all over the world, made in Boston. And but now that your ears, this is the first digital algorithmic reverb that we've listened to together, right? We listened to organic reverb. We listened to analog reverb. So now here's our first digital algorithmic reverb. These are digital delay boxes with fancy algorithms to make them sound like reverb. You'll notice, and some of them are quite different. You'll notice right away a big tonal change from the analog to the digital here. And you'll hear some of them are extra bright, which can have a kind of a fake sound. But actually, some of them sound kind of very similar to the reverbs we were hearing in the churches earlier. You know, some of them sound a little bit obviously like that's fake reverb, but not all of them. Some of them sound quite warm and quite realistic. And here's just a bunch of weird things that they're like, oh, I gotta sample that. So here's just a bunch of weird stuff. And now we'll go finish off finally back to organic reverb. Just weird spaces. Here's a dungeon. Scary. This is what people use for film. This is why people love this for film, because there's an impulse response for every kind of environment, and the film mixer just puts you in the dungeon, and that's it. Okay. Kind of amazing, right? A tour of the world of reverb. And it changes the way that you're going to mix, because you're going to start to visualize and decide where things are, and then you're going to put them where you want them to be, as opposed to just flipping through a bunch of presets and hoping it's cool, which is probably what most people have been doing, which is fine. But we're going to take it further.